It's been just 1 week since a different Texas gunman massacred 5 of his neighbors, including a 9-year-old boy whose father had asked him to stop firing rounds in his yard because a baby was trying to sleep. And the Allen, Texas mall attack is the deadliest attack of the year since the ballroom massacre that left 11 people dead in Southern California. So this is what America is now, everywhere, but especially in red states. Per the CDC, the states with the highest gun death rates are all red states, with the exception of New Mexico, while the lowest gun death rates are found in blue states. But let's face it, we are all literally on a Russian roulette lottery, just waiting for it to be our turn to run screaming from gunfire. And if you manage to not get dead in a mall, at a restaurant, in the Walmart or another store, at a concert, at church, in school, in 3rd grade, in high school, or in college, or even inside your own home, consider yourself lucky. Because America is a shooting gallery. Again, especially the red states. And all that Republicans have to offer for this state of constant terror are thoughts and prayers. One Texas lawmaker even doubled down on it. After all, God works in mysterious ways.
Many people argue that prayers aren't cutting it. Prayers are not preventing the next mass shooting. What is your response to that criticism?
Well, those are people that don't believe in an almighty God who is absolutely in control of our lives. I'm a Christian. I believe that he is. And I know people want to make this political, but prayers are important, and they are powerful in the families who are devastated right now.
And here's the response of Dean Cain, former actor, and let's face it, the worst Superman, who also sits on the board of the NRA, the premier death merchant in America, in that it owns, lock, stock, and barrel, an entire political party whose members have been trained to love guns more than they love your or even their own children. Cain tweeted in response to the Texas mall shooting, quote, "I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery," a perfect encapsulation of the NRA and Republican point of view. Unless you think Cain is smart enough to have composed that line, you should know that he was quoting Thomas Jefferson, who actually wrote it in Latin, "Malo periculosum libertatem quam quietum servitutem." In 1987, Jefferson was writing to his fellow slaveholder, James Madison, about Shays' Rebellion, a violent uprising by Massachusetts farmers that began the previous year. The farmers, led by a man called Daniel Shays, a veteran of the Revolutionary War, were debt-ridden and opposed the excessive Massachusetts property taxes and penalties imposed upon them after the war. Eventually, hundreds would march to the state armory, threatening to overthrow the government, January 6th style. But the attempt was unsuccessful. Jefferson's attitude about all of that was, "I hold it that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing, since at least liberty and democracy were better than monarchy." Jefferson, of course, didn't think that about the liberty of the men, women, and children he enslaved, including the teenager he was serially raping. A little rebellion by them would have brought on a whipping. But I digress. At that time that Jefferson wrote that line, that Dean Cain would later use to demonstrate his callousness toward dead children at a mall, there was no Second Amendment because there was no U.S. Constitution. America was still under the Articles of Confederation. George Washington wouldn't become president of the United States until the actual Constitution was enacted in 1789. And the precious Second Amendment wouldn't even be adopted until 2 years after that, in 1791, in the shadow of yet another violent citizens' rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion in Pennsylvania, which was also about high taxes. Slaveholder George Washington was so enraged by the Shays' Rebellion that he wrote letters excoriating these kinds of armed uprisings, saying in one letter to his military aide, David Humphreys, quote, "Commotions of this sort, like snowballs, gather strength as they roll, as if there is no opposition in the way to divide and crumble them. I am mortified beyond expression that in the moment of our acknowledged independence, we should by our conduct verify the predictions of our transatlantic foe and render ourselves ridiculous and contemptible in the eyes of all Europe." How ironic that today we find ourselves rendered ridiculous and contemptible in the eyes of all Europe due to our gun massacres. The founders that Republicans worship hated rebellions, farmers' rebellions, slave rebellions, and they wrote in an amendment designed to quell them, not to encourage them, by writing into law the state militias that all white men in the 13 states were required to serve in, with their privately held muskets. Shays' rebellion was put down when a group of wealthy Boston merchants put together a militia to put down the revolting farmers. The Second Amendment was written to ensure public order, not public chaos. The author of the Second Amendment, as it turns out, was Jefferson's slave-holding pen pal, James Madison. The idea that its intention was to encourage more uprisings like January 6th, as some Republicans have hinted, is ridiculous. The idea that it was written to make mass shootings possible in a future these men of the 18th century couldn't possibly foresee is evil. Because what Republicans are basically saying is that their precious Second Amendment is a suicide pact, a murder pact, and a national consent to get slaughtered at the mall. Joining me now is Democratic State Senator Roland Gutierrez, whose district includes Uvalde, site of last year's elementary school mass shooting, and Shannon Watts, founder of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. I do want to start with you, State Senator Gutierrez, to just respond to this latest round of useless thoughts and prayers from your state's leaders.
Well, thank you, Joy, for having me. Listen, I think that we've all just had enough with the prayers. We want, common sense gun solutions. We want to get something done because that's what the citizenry across this state and across this nation deserve. We're living in a state of chaos right now, and it's chaos that has been wholly created by Greg Abbott, Dan Patrick, and others. They have created a system in place over the last 10 years or so where we have a loose and lax system of gun laws. There really are no gun laws in Texas, not the kind of gun laws that Shannon Watts and others would like to see. The kind of gun laws that Republicans pose are how to give access to more militarized weaponry in the state of Texas. In point of fact, we've gotten very far this year in that we've got a good bill that got out of the House today. Sadly, I don't think it's going anywhere. We need to stop praying. We need to start doing something about this. The people in Uvalde, these people in Allen, Texas, and beyond are demanding we do something.
And to talk about that bill, to stay with you for a second, Senator, so this was a surprise bill. After this shooting, the Texas House panel has okayed a bill that would raise the age to buy semi-automatic rifles. What people, I think, across the country don't understand, that gun regulation really applies to pistols. If you want a rifle, even if it's a semi-automatic rifle, basically the civilian equivalent of an M16, you can just buy one, at like the sporting goods store or like a pawn shop. So you don't think that that modest bill out of the House can pass through the Senate or the full House?
Well, sadly, as you just said, Joy, we have an age limit on handguns. We have no age limit on AR-15s. To your point, you can pick up an AR-15 if you're 18 at all of those shows, at all of the gun shops, but you can also pick one up at a gun show where you don't even have to show an ID. This is the kind of system that these Republicans have put in place. No ID. All you got to do is say that you're a U.S. citizen and you haven't had a felony. If you're not buying from an authorized dealer at the gun convention, then you walk out with your fully loaded AR-15. And because of the laws that the Republicans have put in place, you can walk down Congress Avenue in Austin, Texas, and no cop can even stop you or ask you a question. That's just complete and utter chaos. But that's the state of affairs in Texas. And believe it or not, that happens in Texas daily. We have people that want to do their demonstrations in that way. We're completely lost. It's sad, but I don't think that this bill is going to go any further. But listen, hope springs eternal. And those Uvalde families have worked very hard. I had lunch with them today, and they're going to continue working. We've got to continue putting pressure on those Republican House committee chairs and the Calendars Committee. I urge everybody in Texas to call their state legislator and demand that we do something now on this issue.
Shannon, let me go to you because, Texas had 9 mass shootings in the past 14 years. And all that's happened, as the senator has pointed out, is that they just made the gun laws looser in the state of Texas. In fact, the governor of Texas, he tweeted the following in 2015. I'm embarrassed. Texas is number 2 in the nation for new gun purchases behind California. Let's pick up the pace, Texans. And he put the NRA in that. And to that point about the AR-15, I mean, if more guns made the state more safe, as you have tweeted, Texas would be the safest state in the union. It said it is the massacre capital of the world, not just the United States. Eugene Stoner who invented the AR-15 in the late 1950s, and this is what his family said, had no interest in civilians using his invention, according to C. Reed Knight, who considers Stoner his mentor. He looked at this thing as only for the military side of the house, Knight said, adding that Stoner would have been horrified by the idea that he invented the tool of all this carnage in the schools. This was invented for the military, and yet if you have a mind to do a mass shooting, you can pick one up on your way to the mass shooting without any background check. Your thoughts on the fact that that is the state of affairs Republicans would like to continue forever?
Well, I mean, that's the reporting that's coming out now about the mass shooter in Allen, Texas, that in fact his guns were bought by an unlicensed seller, probably without a background check. Millions of guns are sold this way in this country every year because of that loophole that exists that we need to close at a federal level. We have closed it in over 20 states, but at the same time, the NRA is going state by state and passing something called permitless carry, which recently passed in Texas, which means you can carry a hidden loaded handgun in public with absolutely no background check, no permit, and no safety training. And as you said, if more guns and fewer gun laws made us safer, Texas would be the safest state in the country. Instead, they're home to half of the deadliest mass shootings in this country. And gun homicides in the state of Texas have gone up 90% in the last decade. When will the guns make us safer? The answer is never. And lawmakers know that. They want to debate prayers. They want to debate mental illness. They want to debate evil. The reality is that we are giving citizens unfettered access to arsenals and ammunition. And that is why we have a 25 times higher gun homicide rate than any peer nation. It is the guns.